There are lots of great things about Christmas, but one of the best has to be opening presents, doesn't it? I mean, isn't it fun to open a gift and see what is inside? I thought that would be the perfect way to begin today's message. So, anybody interested? The other great thing about presents is the anticipation of waiting to see what might be inside. And so today I thought maybe we would place this right here and come back to it in just a few moments. If we haven't met before, my name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here at the Summit, and today we're kicking off this sermon series to take us through the Christmas season called Jesus with Us. And I don't know if you could tell when you walked in, but we've been excited about Christmas recently. We've been thinking about it for a long time. We've been planning for it. We've been praying about it. We've been looking forward to these moments where we get to share with you what is happening this Christmas season. And here's the thing. This is true personally, and it can also be true of us as a church, that we spend so much time thinking about what is coming that we miss out on what's actually happening around us. I can't tell you how many weddings that I've been to that the details were so locked down and the whole thing was devoid of joy. And it's tempting for that to happen to us at Christmas, right? I mean, when you got to get all the Christmas presents bought and all the decorations put up and RSVPs to all the parties, and we got to send out our Christmas cards if we're over the age of 50. So there are things that we have to do. And sometimes we allow all of those things in our world to suck the joy out of what we're doing. And so here's what I want to do. My hope is that this Christmas, that when you walk in these doors, that what you experience is the joy of this season because your understanding of the story is growing. See, I want to pull through this thread, and I want you to walk away with this. Understanding deepens appreciation. The more you know about the Christmas story, the more you see the pieces coming together, the behind the scenes that suddenly becomes a little bit more important, the more you appreciate what's happening. The more you know, the more the story begins to mean. And so today, I'm going to have an invitation for you. My invitation for you is going to be that you read the Christmas story with us, that we do it collectively, that you enter in, you read the daily devotional, that you commit to reading the story this Christmas season, that you commit to learning more yourself so that you can invite other people to join you along the way. And it's an important piece of the Christmas season because I believe that when we understand the big picture of what's actually happening at Christmas, that it makes the whole thing even more meaningful. So today, we're going to be in the Gospel of Luke. Now, just to set the stage for you, if you're new to church or maybe you haven't been thinking about these things for a while, there are 4 books that begin the New Testament, and they're called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You may have heard someone refer to them somewhere along the way. And Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are 4 different looks at Jesus' life. The Gospel is essentially the story of Jesus. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all have a unique perspective that they bring to the story. They have their own experiences. They have their own bent. They have their own background. And all of this they bring to the story, and they share with us who they see Jesus being and how important he is based on where they're coming from. So we don't just get one look at Jesus. Instead, we get this holistic, well-rounded look at who Jesus is and what Jesus claims to do. And it's interesting because Luke, the author we're going to be looking at today, is super tuned in to the detail of the story. Because Luke was a first century doctor, the details, the nuance, it really mattered to him. And we're going to hear from him directly, from his pen, why it matters to him that we get the story right. And so that's where we're going to begin today. In Luke chapter 1 and verse 1, right at the very beginning, we're going to see what Luke says. Here's what he writes. Many people have set out to write accounts about events that have been fulfilled among us. They use the eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. So right off the bat, here's what Luke says. He says, I know that I'm not the only one. I know that there are others. I know other people have things to say. Luke acknowledges that from the beginning, but he's going to tell us very specifically why he's writing the things that he's writing. But more than that, Luke's opening words tell us about the popularity, the ubiquity of Jesus. People everywhere knew who he was and what he was doing. When there is someone famous that is doing something, there are kind of two schools of thought. Some people try to get to know as much as they can about them and like grab a hold of the popularity and the excitement and the energy, and they become part of it. And then there are the people who are skeptics, and they kind of look at it and like, okay, that can't possibly be real. And I would imagine there were people on both sides when it came to Jesus. There were some who were just dying to hear what it is Jesus had to say. And then there were others who didn't care at all what it was that Jesus had to say. In fact, they were hoping that what they would hear is that who Jesus said he was wasn't in fact true. And so Luke is investigating this for us. Now, you know how this works if you're a Kansas City Chiefs fan. You know that everyone is watching the Chiefs, don't you? I mean, check out this graphic. 4 out of the 5 most highly viewed games this year in the NFL have been with your Kansas City Chiefs, which tells us that the Chiefs are, in fact, America's team and the Cowboys are not. That is just what that tells us. The numbers don't lie, folks. But there are people who, in addition to watching, there are those who want nothing more than for the Chiefs to fail. They're watching every game. They're posting every missed call on Twitter, showing that the referees are favoring and supporting our Chiefs. Unfortunately, the game on Friday did not help those of us who do not see that being the case. But you see how this works. People are looking closely, they're examining, they're trying to find all the details. And Luke is doing the same thing, and he's trying to understand what it is that they are seeing about Jesus. He wants to see what all the fuss is about, and he wants to be able to prove whether or not who Jesus says he is, who people are saying he is in fact true. Let's continue, verse 3. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning. I'm going to pause right here. So Luke tells us very, very clearly what he's doing. He's not just giving us a general overview. Luke tells us, hey, I'm looking at the detail. He says there are lots of other accounts, but my account is looking from the very beginning. I'm looking at everything, and I'm going to tell you what I know. It has been fact-checked, and it has been determined that what I am writing is the true version. Because for Luke, myth or falsehood is unacceptable. He's an educated man. He doesn't want to follow something that is not true. He doesn't want to tell people about something that is not true. And so what he does is he looks closely at the account, and he begins to share what it is that he found. Luke has been out there doing his homework. He's been spending time with people like Paul and Demas and Aristarchus and Mark, and he's been learning everything he can about the stories of Jesus. And he's been bumping them up against each other, and he's been talking to everyone that will listen. And what Paul gives us is what he calls a carefully investigated account. He continues, I have also decided to write an accurate account for you, most honorable Theophilus. In other words, Jesus says, what you are going to find here is accurate. And it matters who he's writing with in mind, and that person is Theophilus. Now, I don't know about you, but I wonder who Theophilus is. Theophilus is a common name in the first century. It's a compound word, theo meaning God, and the root word philis meaning love, and so it's a lover of God. It's someone who is a person who is a person of faith, perhaps. But there's this prefix on there, most honorable, a title that tells us a little more. And what we learn is that this is likely an official in the Roman government. And so Luke is doing the research, and he's writing the letter, and he's saying, most honorable Theophilus, government guy, person who has influence and power in the government, you need to know that this is what is true. Because Theophilus is probably wondering, is all this stuff that we're hearing in the Roman Empire true? Are all these people talking about Jesus and the things that he's done? Can we count on these things? Is it accurate? And so I wonder what would happen to us if we would just get curious in a moment like this. If we would approach the story the way that Paul has, or as Luke has, looking for the truth about what might be said. It isn't a myth or lore. It is truth that we can trust. So Luke wants to clear up any misconceptions or confusion that we have. So he's writing so that people, regardless of their upbringing, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their past, can know the full story of Jesus' life. Now, why does that matter? Remember that we said this at the beginning. Understanding deepens appreciation. So today, I want to invite you to put yourself smack dab in the middle of this story. I want to invite you to enter into the life that the first century people were living. And it was a life that was defined by chaos. The first century people were living under the thumb of the Roman government. Everywhere they went, they were being overlooked and overwatched by the Roman government. They couldn't do what they wanted to without the Roman government giving them permission to do so. They were people who were in need of hope. The people of Israel, God's chosen people, were living in captivity. They were living a difficult life. In fact, one scholar says it like this: Rome had brought world peace, but with peace came heavy taxes, armies of mercenaries stationed in every land, Roman culture and values, the gladiatorial games, slavery, and misery. There was injustice, there was war, there was poverty, and they were longing for redemption. They wanted nothing more than for the Roman government to be overthrown and to finally feel freedom once again. And so this story, this whole story, is the story of God bringing freedom to an oppressed people. And I wonder, have you ever found yourself in a spot like that, where life wasn't going how you hoped it would, where there was a bump in the road, or maybe it was a gigantic detour that you didn't know you were going to find? Maybe you've had that in the past and you can point to it as a moment in time, or maybe you're walking through it even now. In these moments is the place that the Christmas story comes to life. It's fascinating that the story of Jesus doesn't take place when there are rainbows and unicorns, but instead when there's war and injustice and fighting and poverty. It's into this world that Jesus is born, and it's into this world that hope is given. So today, regardless of where you find yourself, whether you're in a super sweet spot and life is good, or maybe it feels a little bumpy and it's not what you hoped it would be, or all that you thought that it could be, it's in moments like these that the hope of Jesus truly comes alive for each one of us. And it happens through the birth of not one, but two babies. When you got up this morning and came to church, you probably didn't think you were going to hear about the birth of anyone but Jesus. And we're going to get there in just a minute, but there's another baby that's born that actually sets the stage for where we're going. And this baby is born to Elizabeth and Zechariah, and his name is John. Now, Zechariah and Elizabeth are an older married couple, and they've been trying to have babies for a long time. They've been unsuccessful. They wanted a family. They were unable to have a family, and so they were just living life. They were doing their thing. They were minding their own business. In fact, Zechariah was doing his work in the temple when this begins to unfold. He's a priest of the day, and priests are on a rotation where eventually in their career, in their ministry career, they find themselves in the temple making the sacrifice. And that's where Zechariah is. This is the moment of a lifetime for him. And it's in the midst of this moment for a lifetime that an angel shows up and appears next to Zechariah. And what we know is that he was a little bit startled by that. Now, I imagine you and I would be too, right? You're standing there and suddenly someone else is standing there. It's like, who are you? What are you doing? It's a little bit of a jump scare maybe. And so in this moment, the angel sees what's happening and says this, verse 13. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife, Elizabeth, will give you a son, and you are to name him John." The first baby in the story is a baby named John. He would go on to be called John the Baptist. You may have heard about him. He ate locusts and honey and lived in the wilderness. And he came and he preached sermons, and his sermons weren't fluffy at all. His sermon was repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. He was very direct and specific about what people needed to do, and he was getting people ready to hear the message that Jesus was going to bring. And his ministry and his life and his announcement of birth runs parallel to Jesus in lots of ways. And as we think about elderly people having babies, it maybe shocks us initially, but perhaps it shouldn't be that surprising. I mean, it wasn't the first time that older people in the Bible had babies. Abraham and Sarah had Isaac in their old age. Rachel and Jacob had Joseph and Benjamin. And then you remember Samson and Saul, who were both born to elderly parents. This isn't a new strategy. This is something God has been doing all along. He's been taking unexpected people and having them do unexpected things. And we see all of these pieces come together and we see the dots connect. We remember that understanding deepens appreciation. The second baby born in the story, you know which one it is. It's going to be the story of Jesus, and it happens in much the same way, actually. Mary and Joseph are living their lives. They're engaged to be married, and in a moment, Mary is approached by an angel. Angel is next to her, and here's what the angel says. This is in Luke chapter 1, verse 30. Don't be afraid, Mary. I get the sense the angel said don't be afraid a lot, okay? So shows up, people get scared, don't be afraid. For you have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus. The birth of Jesus was not only improbable, it was impossible, apart from God's hand in the story. Mary was biologically unable to have a child, and yet she gave birth to a baby named Jesus, which is how we know that this story is a miracle. And not only that, but God's people had all along known this was going to happen. See, they'd read the Old Testament scriptures. They knew the Torah by heart. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The Jewish scholars would have those memorized word for word, verbatim. And the people who had gone to the temple had heard the teachings of the prophets. They had heard the teachings of the Psalms. They knew what to expect in Scripture. And so no doubt they would have known this passage. Isaiah 7:14, the prophet says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." This plan is continuing to unfold in much the same way that we shouldn't be surprised that elderly people are having babies with Zechariah and Elizabeth. We also shouldn't be surprised that a virgin is giving birth to a baby and that baby is going to be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father,